Okay, so let's look at another applique technique, and we're going to create something similar to this flower that we've got here, but we're going to do what we call raw edge applique. So raw edge applique is where you will literally take your fabrics and you layer one on top of the other, and then you finish each of those applique pieces with a stitch, and it can either be a hand stitch or it could be a machine stitch. So I've got my petals here, so I'm just going to get my petals ready, and I've put some fusible webbing on the back. Because we're going to the machine, it's a little bit easier to actually have them fused in place to start with. You don't have as many pins or needles that you need to keep an eye on. So yeah, just literally fuse it in place. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to arrange them on the piece of fabric that I've got until I've got a design that I like and that I'm happy with. Put those, they're not stuck in place at the moment. When we iron them, they will be. At the moment, I'm just kind of building up my design, and then we'll iron it to keep it all in place in just a few moments. And then we'll have a centre that's done like so. It could be that you put a button in place or something like that if you wanted to, but we're actually going to do it like so. And then place everything in, and if you're happy with that, then you just fuse it in place. Try not to move the iron because you can move the pieces, so it's more of a pressing down and holding it just a few moments, just so as the heat can activate the adhesive and it keeps everything in place. So there, that is in place like so. Now, depending on your base layer, so I've got some denim here. If you've got something that's a lighter weight fabric, then what you might want to do is use some stabilizer. So I will use a stabilizer on this occasion. And then all I'm going to do is pop that underneath. And this is tear away, so it's one that I can literally just tear it away when I've finished. Just put a few pins in place just to keep it flat, but these pins can be out of the way of your work. You don't have to get too close. But before we actually apply any stitches, you need to decide on what type of stitch you're going to use. Now, there are some favourites. I might do them in different stitches so you can see all the different ones. So let's start off with one of my personal favourites, which is like a blanket stitch. So Raw Edge Applique is a perfect opportunity for us to use some of these fabulous decorative stitches that we have on our sewing machines. A lot of them we don't regularly use, so yeah, why not use them in a little bit of Raw Edge Applique? Some of the favourites are a little blanket stitch, maybe like the one that we've got here. A satin stitch is always a popular one as well. Or you can keep it very simple and just do a zigzag or even a straight stitch. Technically, there are no rules when it comes to your applique stitch, so you decide. But I'm going to work with number 14 that we've got here under menu 2. So I've got a little practice piece, and I do always suggest that you do a practice piece before you go on to your actual applique. So I've got exactly the same. I've got the layer of stabilizer, I've got my denim, and I have actually got an extra petal as well. Because what we need to do is choose our stitch that's going to be able to stitch the raw edge of your applique in place. So one of my favourite stitches is a little blanket stitch. So I've set that up. And I'm just going to show you on the edge here just what that stitch looks like when I've set it up with the factory settings. Because what you might find is that you need to actually change it because it might be too long, it might be too wide for what you need it to be. So I've done a few stitches there, so I'm just going to stop that and cut the threads and have a little look. And you can see there, so now I've changed my settings, I'm just going to do another little row just to the side and give those a little bit of a test and see if I'm happy with the results from that. So yeah, I'm much happier with that. I want to be able to see these stitches. If you want it to be something that's a bit kind of more subliminal, then obviously you can make it smaller. If you wanted to make it even bolder, then you could use a contrast thread. So I've got the settings that I'm happy with. So I'm just going to start stitching around the piece just to make sure that I've got it set up exactly as I want it to be. And all I'm doing now is following the centre line of my foot is on the raw edge applique, so the raw edge of the applique piece, and I'm just working my way around, stitching around the edge. Like so. So I'm going to stop there because I'm going to show you another stitch that you might choose to use. So there you go. So you can see that result, which I like the look of. But it might be that you want to use something like a satin stitch. Okay, so let's go back and have a little look at the satin stitch. So if I change my stitch number 11, so I've changed it. So on another part of our fabric, I'm just going to do another little test. It's always easier to do your test pieces before you actually get onto your main part. So this particular stitch is called a satin stitch, and it's much denser in appearance. So this is where having that stabilizer underneath is really going to help keep those stitches flat. So let's have a look at that one. So there you go. That's a satin stitch. It's a very neat stitch, but I think it's a little bit too heavy for what we need on this occasion. So I'm going to stick to my blanket stitch. So now I'm happy with my stitch. I can come into my main piece of work. Now, when you're actually constructing your applique, you work from the back to the front. So the back levels are placed down in place to start with, and then the piece that you want most at the front sits on top. It's a similar sort of idea when it comes to stitching the layers down. So start with the pieces that are behind those front pieces, and then you'll come back and stitch around that circle as your last stitch. So again, you can start anywhere you like, and then just follow the edge of your piece. Now, when you do get to the point where you're needing to stop your sewing, then all you need to do is break your threads or cut your threads and then move on. If you need to, you can use a little travel stitch to move from one area to the next, but because we're going to be stitching over the yellow circle in a different thread in a little while, I'm not going to bother doing that. So you can see there we've got one petal done. I'm quite happy with that. Let's carry on with the others. And we're just going to work on the centerpiece. And I think I'll use that satin stitch that we were looking at to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to work on the centerpiece. Now, circles can be quite difficult to actually applique and get a nice smooth finish. So a top tip from me, if you use the same colour thread as the fabric, it's much more forgiving. Again, just keep those stitches slow and steady. And if you do feel the need that you are going to need to reposition, then it's a good idea to do it on the outside of the circle, because that way you can pivot it and the stitches will overlap on the inside. If you do it on the outside, then they tend to open up. Or sorry, if you do the needle on the inside, then they tend to open up. So again, I need to alter it. So I just want to make sure that that needle is on the right hand side, the outer edge, and then just move it in. This is when you hold your breath and hope that it all lines up. I think we're kind of there. Yep, not too bad. So there you go. So that's Raw Edge Appliqué, finished with a sewing stitch off obviously a sewing machine, but you could replicate that with hand stitches if you wanted to. But the key thing is the fabric hasn't been turned under, so that's why it's called Raw Edge. So now that we're all finished, very happy with that, we just need to take the stabilizer off. So all you do is just take that and pull it away. And if needs be, just kind of separate it out and pull it away from your project. If you're working with a weighty fabric like the denim, you could potentially get away without using the stabilizer, especially for the blanket stitch. But because you've got a big density of stitches in the center, that's where the stabilizer is really useful, because then it keeps your stitches nice and flat and it stops any puckering.